Cool. Thanks for coming. Appreciate the big turnout on a Monday morning. It's the first early stages. So I'm Simon Hade, co-founder and CEO of Space Ape Games. A lot of the things I'm going to be talking about today really come from my experiences founding and working at Space Ape over the last 4 years, but also drawing on a lot of the lessons I've learned from people who work there, who I met at Playfish, where I was before, and prior to that I was at Skype for many years, and originally a lawyer, but less said about that the better. First of all, how many people here are familiar with our games? Quite a few. That's awesome. Thank you. A lot of the examples I'm going to give will refer back to these games. These are our 3 titles: Samurai Siege, Rival Kingdoms, and Transformers Earth Wars, which launched 2 months ago. So just to give a bit of context about the origins of these games and how that led into the ways we do in-game events and live ops. So Samurai Siege was our first successful game. It wasn't our first game, actually. We founded the company on this premise that the winners in mobile were going to be those who broke new ground and defined new genres and or new play patterns and really owned those genres. And we were right on that thesis, I think, but on the actual genre we chose, real-time predictive sports, that didn't play out as the winner that we thought it might be. So when we started making Samurai Siege, we'd burned through a lot of our funding. We had about 9 months runway left, and we said, look, we can't take any chances here. We've got to do something safe and pay the bills. So we fast-followed Clash of Clans. Whereas a lot of people who sort of follow in categories sort of fall down, what we did is we chose a specific and very deliberate area to innovate on, and we identified a segment that we thought would be underserved by Supercell moving forward as the dominant player in the category. They should go broad. And so we carved off a niche for ourselves, servicing really hardcore players of the genre. And that's what we do with Samurai Siege, invested in features that they wanted, and a program that allowed us to continue to give really core players of the game the experience they wanted. So we introduced Alliance Wars, we introduced live events, and that did pretty well for us. The game's made nearly $40 million over the 3 years it's been live, and it's funded the studio to do other things. The thesis for Rival Kingdoms, which launched about a year ago, excuse me, was to really double down on that. So we'd made Samurai Siege very fast. We'd had put a few features in there that were kind of patched together, but did the job. With Rival Kingdoms, we wanted to make a game that was really perfect for the core player. So really, really deep strategic gameplay, really sophisticated live events. We overindulged a bit in the theme, as you can see. That also went really core. And I gave a GDC presentation in February, which is in the vault, about how that really held the game back. So, but that's not the topic for today. Nevertheless, this game did quite well for us. And the way Transformers was born in beta, we saw that we'd made a misstep with the theming of Rival Kingdoms, and so we did a deal to port that game and adapt it for the Transformers brand, solve our marketing problem, but it also opened up some new challenges for us in dealing with more casual events and events around a gacha system that I'll talk about shortly, that meant that the playbooks that we use for the different games for live ops and events are very different, even though they're still in the same genre. There's still a basic core loop. The subtleties of the games are very different. As I said, Rival Kingdoms, some screenshots there. It shows it's a very complex social meta in Rival Kingdoms. You play roles in your kingdoms, and a lot of the events are designed to fuel that the politics and the drama that come from the deep social gameplay. Whereas Samurai Siege was quite simple in its content. The content was relatively hard to bolt on, so we solved that problem with Rival Kingdoms by making the game all about these ancients. These ancients have very, very important strategic elements to the game. You can see here the spells and the gameplay are very different depending on which ancient you use. There are about 75 of them in the game now, but they're quite cheap to produce. They're just 2D art that overlays on top. The most expensive ones are the dragons, who are actually on the canvas, but we've only got 4 or 5 of those. The rest of them are all in the meta. So content that's quite cheap to produce, but very impactful gameplay-wise, because it determines what spells and abilities you can take in, and that's really important. When I talk about events, I talk about things that are overlaid on top of the core loop. Core loop is you're building a base, you're attacking other players to get resources to build a bigger base. And the events sort of provide other objectives for a short period of time. So this is an example of a personal event. This is one that you just compete in by yourself. Every time you do a battle, you get some currency. The more currency you get, the more that totalizer on the right fills up and unlocks rewards. We merchandise that heavily in the game. We build stories around it, and this becomes the game after a certain period of time playing. The Alliance version of that looks very similar. Same idea. You've got a bunch of rewards that you get as your Alliance, as members of your Alliance generate this currency. And when the Alliance unlocks the reward, everyone in the Alliance gets it. So it creates some nice social dynamics where maybe you haven't pulled your weight this event. You might be expected to pull your weight next event, and not leech off the Alliance. So that's just a high-level recap of the two most popular forms of events that we do. What it means, business terms, this is a graph showing daily revenue on Samurai Siege the last 12 months. The blue line is the daily revenue. Every time there's a spike, that's an event that we're running. So we run these events every week. The orange line there is the baseline revenue. So this is the amount of revenue the core game loop generates. And everything above that is stuff that we attribute to events. So as you can see there, you do the maths, nearly half the revenue in Samurai Siege the last 12 months has come directly from these events. In Rival Kingdoms, the percentage is a bit lower. It's a bit under a third. That is not to say that the events in Rival Kingdoms are worse. It's a reflection of a higher baseline. In fact, it's earlier in its cycle. To give you an example, that personal tournament was a format that was very popular in Samurai Siege, but didn't drive much money. It was an event that we did every now and then called an engagement event. And what we saw in the data was users who installed the game within 7 days prior to us running one of these personal tournaments, they engaged better, their lifetime value was longer. And the reason being that a lot of these games kind of look the same. And even when they're very different, first impressions are that, it's another one of those sorts of games. And by presenting a personal tournament to people early in their cycle, it really captured the promise of the late game and why you should stick around. And it was very taxing. And so what we did in Rival Kingdoms is we productized that event. So rather than running these events every 4 to 6 weeks, we would just serve that up programmatically to the user at the right point in the life cycle. So baked into that baseline are a lot of events that are happening daily. They're just sort of productized as part of the core game now. But everything, all those spikes, they're bespoke events that we're running. So still a big part of the business. I would imagine in 3 years' time that it's going to look more like Samurai Siege, so a higher percentage driven from events and less from the core game. Some of the softer and not really soft, some other benefits of running events is we have really crazy high long-term retention of players. Once you have got to Castle Level 8 in Samurai Siege or the equivalent Stronghold in Rival Kingdoms, we have something like 99% month-to-month retention. It's crazy. And this does correlate to events. Like when we drop the ball with events, people do get tired of it. When we do a bad job of running events, this drives it. So there's a very, very clear correlation to short-term revenue and long-term retention. So why do events? You can double the revenue, lifetime revenue of your game if you get it right, and it's really great for core players. Of course, nothing good comes for free. It's a lot of work. We've made a lot of mistakes. One of the things to watch for is cannibalization. So you see here, when you zoom in on this graph, that orange line represents the amount of money we should be making from the game, from the core systems. Obviously, the blue line is the money made from events, but then after every event, there's a dip below the baseline. That's cannibalization. So it's money that we would have otherwise made if we hadn't run the event, but we're not making now because we've run the event. And good news is there's a lot more blue than red on this, so that's a win. Cannibalization is not something to be scared of absolutely. It's just you need to understand what it is. Some of the reasons being maybe people have a weekly budget. When we make the game more interesting on a weekend, you spend your money, you're less inclined to spend it during the week. But more often than not, it's around the impact of inflation, deflation of the economy. So imagine Transformers, Earth Wars, the reason you're battling is to get Energon and Alloy to upgrade your base, upgrade your bots. And a very common monetization pinch in these games is I might need 1 million Energon to upgrade Starscream. I farm while I'm watching TV. I get 900,000. I just need that extra 100,000, and I can play for a bit longer, but I want to go to bed. I know that if I go to bed, I'm going to get raided. So, and I'll come back in the morning, I might have 500,000. So rather than do that or stay up late, I might spend a little bit of money to buy that extra 100,000 energon, sink the resources into my upgrade, and then it's safe. And I've got the value I've crystallized the value of the work I've done for the previous hour or so. So that's a big part of the economy. When we give away 10 million energon in an event on a weekend, and that's sitting in people's inventory, obviously they're not going to be spending in that scenario. So a lot of this is down to economy effects. You also get a bit of sales conditioning in here. People learn to realize that the best value is to play on a Friday afternoon. It means they're less likely to play on a Thursday. They'll just wait the extra day. So a lot of things to be aware of, and a lot of traps to fall in to fall into. Another big trap, one that we've fallen into a few times, is around content bloat. So this is a screenshot of one of our top-level players in Samurai Siege. A big chunk of this guy's base is with permanent statues that she's won in previous events over previous years. This is content that new users can't get, but sits in the game permanently, because any player who downloads the game today can go to the leaderboard, look at top players' bases. It's a very important aspirational element of the game. They might hit up this base in matchmaking. So all of these assets take a footprint on that player's device. If you're not streaming it hits your top of funnel because your download gets bigger. And so every piece of permanent content is doing you damage in some way, in terms of performance, file size, etc. So we fell into that trap in Samurai Siege, giving away too many of these permanent pieces of content because players love them. It's a great trophy to have on your base. And so one of the fixes we had for that came from this collections feature in Samurai. The feature didn't work particularly well, but the mechanic was you did battles, you got parts, you put them together, and you got this temporary mercenary camp, which you could use for offense. Yeah, there was a defensive version as well. And the feature didn't work very well, but that tech was very useful, because what it meant is we could take items in the game, tweak them, make them 7-day, 14-day, 30-day content, and so we didn't have this permanent bloat of prizes that we're giving away. And players loved them, not quite as much as the permanent statues, but loved them enough that we could build a live ops cadence around it. So much so, we started selling them in packs, and we made a special store for them. And before we knew it, actually the most engaged players were no longer engaging with the core loop of the game. The core loop of the game is you train troops. If you really want to progress fast, you pay to skip that training. But instead, the gameplay for later players had changed to a kind of min-maxing of events to get the most efficient collection of temporary items. And so we fundamentally changed the core gameplay of the game, and took us a long time to figure out how to bolt systems around that to make the game economy still work. So yeah, if you take your eye off the ball on some of these economy issues, it can really have lasting impact that's really hard to undo. So this is a typical graph that we look at. Apologies for the resolution, but this is the amount of gold on average players have by their castle level, stronghold level in rival kingdoms. And you can see here, for a period of time, about 6 months ago, castle level 17, people had an awful lot of gold in their balances because we've been giving away so much of it in high-level events. Not by design, but it just kind of accumulated. So we added a bunch of sinks, brought it down to a more sustainable level. And so this is the sort of live ops cadence that the product managers and the live ops guys look at day to day. And it's less about what pops on these graphs, because obviously we look at this graph now every week and we don't make the same mistake. It's more figuring out what are the stats that we're not tracking, and looking at the different cuts to figure out what are these impacts on the economy that we're causing but not seeing yet. So things to be wary of: cannibalization, sales conditioning, content bloat, and inadvertently screwing up your economy. So I'll talk a little bit about how we've the sort of cadence we've settled into based on the lessons we've learned along these four things. So I think it's a safe question, a valid question to ask. Do you even need to do this? I mean, I'm very proud of what we've done. We've made a nice little business, but it's not like we're gracing the top of the grossing charts at the moment. And when you look at a lot of the top grossing games, they're not in the West, they're not doing events. So you could say, is it even necessary? I think it's useful to look at Asia for a lot of things in free-to-play gaming. The business model originated there in response to piracy, and a lot of the game mechanics that we're seeing becoming popular have origins directly or indirectly in China and Korea, and to a lesser extent Japan. And if you look at the grossing charts in those countries, the vast majority of the revenue is coming from games where live events and dynamic content are a core part of the game. Two games that we took a lot of inspiration from when designing our live ops systems, Rage of Bahamut back in when we were making Samurai Siege, had a really nice system of having fresh content that was coming in every week. It's very cheap art in terms of it was a trading card game, so they could get away with a lot of really high fidelity stuff, but it was cheap from a performance perspective and dev perspective. On the right, you've got a fan side of Puzzles and Dragons that it's attempting to track all of the events and things that are going on in the game. Very successful game, and you talk to highly engaged players of that game, and it's really all about optimizing the time of day and time of week that you're playing to chase the content, chase the events that the developers are designing. So when you look at the West, so top 40, top 50 grossing games, very few of them are using a rigorous in-game event system or content system, or even stretching the definition for some of these, like episode. It's a lot of content, but not really events in the sense that I'm talking about. You go down to top 50, top 100 grossing, you see more, but still it's the minority of the charts. So the vast majority of games are not doing in-game events, not getting in-game content. The ones that are tend to be more mid-core focused, but they're growing in number. If you'd done that graph a year ago, there would have been far fewer games doing events. The top right, you've got MMO strategy games. In that genre, having really sophisticated programmatic live events really is table stakes. I don't need to tell the locals in this room, obviously, because there are an awful lot of browser MMOs that a lot of this stuff came from. But that's a certain type of game that does events sort of to the next level. The events that we're doing are probably more like what you see in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes or Contest of Champions, more curated, more bigger production value events that are not necessarily part of the everyday gameplay. So interesting thing about those games that I'll come back to shortly is they're great executions of events in a gacha business model. So for those who don't know, the difference between the games on the right where you're farming content to get farming resources to then go and buy stuff that you can put your finger on. In a gacha business model, you're getting resources to put into a slot machine, and you may get a valuable thing back, you may get a less valuable thing back, but it's a slightly different approach to events when you've got a business model, a game based on a gacha business model to a progression one. So to answer the question, do we need to do events in the West to be successful? I think the answer is no. I think it's clear that the winning formula at the moment in the West is to have a game that defines a particular play pattern or a particular genre in the way that Candy Crush is synonymous with anything that's matching three together, or Clash of Clans is synonymous with strategy. You can come at those genres with a brand, but if you're focused on a valuable niche community and that's your game and that's the place you're playing it, and there are very big successful games that do this, then I think live ops and events are pretty key. So how we came to figure out live ops, we were about 18 months into the life cycle of Samurai Siege, and we had a bit of a problem. We were small, we'd raised some money and we were doing well, but we wanted to do other things. We had Rival Kingdoms launching, we'd just done the deal for the Transformers game, and we wanted to get back and orientate more of our company towards that original thesis of defining and owning new genres. And we had 16 people, a lot of our best developers tied up on Samurai Siege, shipping a lot of features, doing a lot of work, but it's sort of hard to look at this graph and conclude that Samurai Siege is going to be a big part of our future. So what we did is we spun that team down over a period of 3 months, pulling all the developers off. And we ended up with what we found to be the optimal team size for Samurai, 4 people. So you'd expect that blue line to keep going down, but actually we saw something different. The decline was arrested and actually grew over the following 6 months. And I thought that was really interesting. Also, the profit per head grew. And so we had this interesting situation where we put all this time shipping features and making big changes to Samurai Siege over the years. And really what players liked was content. And so we concluded, and I think the subsequent games have proven this out, that putting a game to live ops can revive it and can be more valuable from a player's perspective than necessarily putting a lot of features in the game. Certainly makes a lot of sense business-wise. The amount of profit per employee that people in Samurai Siege are probably the most impactful, or one of the most impactful teams in the company. But it's not just a matter of pulling people off, right? You need to have the right people on that game. So what do they look like? Well, I think at any live ops team, this is like with the games in live ops only mode with no developers, or whether you're running a live ops team alongside your production team, that live ops function needs a leader. Self-explanatory, I guess, but we've made the mistake of not putting someone in charge. You need someone who's obsessing around the economy, not just the graphs that are spewed out every month, part of your regular reporting, but looking beyond those graphs and figuring out the things that you're not reporting that are going to creep up on you. You need someone focused on design. It's a very important function. It's very tempting to turn your game into a spreadsheet. That works for a little while, but players see through it. And if you're going to make a sustainable live ops function, you need someone who's really in the minds of the player and making sure the gameplay is fun. Now, they're working within different parameters to designer on a dev title, but it's very important. You need someone who's actually programming the campaigns. It's a very skill set to maybe a performance marketer, whereas a lot of grunt work doing this, but also it's really important to get right. You need someone managing the community, and of course you need QA. It's a different type of QA than feature QA. Now, that doesn't mean you need 6 people. In Samurai, various times, the different teams, people have worn 2 hats. The general theme at Space Ape is we hire T-shaped people, so someone who's really good at one thing and pretty good at 2 other things. And that's especially important on the live ops because you need the team to be able to function when they're really small. And if your designer goes away for a week, that doesn't mean you should stop putting events out. Just because the QA person's away for 2 weeks doesn't mean you can ship without QA. So everyone needs to do everyone else's job to a greater or lesser extent. Very high output and a very close-knit team. It's also a great training ground. So these are the current 4 people on Samurai Siege. George started in our community department, a really hardcore player. He managed our VIP program, he moved to live ops, he was then a product manager. He's now the product owner of Siege, and he'll be moving on to another game soon. Glenn came through QA and design, and Fabian and Patricia coming up through the CS and community departments. We've had 2 people pass through Siege, an analyst who wanted to be a PM, and a QA guy who wanted to be a designer, and they're off on new games. So it's a great university. It's a relatively safe environment because you've got fewer unknowns. You're working within more templates. You've got a lot of history of what worked and what didn't work in the past. And so all these people are pretty junior. Really, I would say the one area where you do need a bit of oversight is on the economy management because that's a skill that helps to have a bit of pattern recognition on. But you can complement that by having someone on another team overseeing it. So what we do sometimes. So find T-shaped people. Don't be afraid to think of live ops as a training ground for future product managers, for product owners. But again, it's not just a matter of putting the right people on. You need to invest in the tools and content so that they can do their job. Which brings me to the second part of our live ops sort of ecosystem. The tools, the team is the first bit, the toy box and the treadmill are the second and third bits. So going back to the inspiration we drew from Rage of Bahamut as a classic example where each time they did an event, the graphics looks amazing, there was something new. We wanted to do that in our event system. We thought it was very important to be able to create a sense of urgency around the events and produce time-limited offers and have a way of surfacing those offers to the right people at the right time. We thought it was very important to make sure that the core gameplay during an event felt fresh and was new. Doesn't mean you need to change the whole game. Small changes can have a big impact, as I'll show shortly. But this was a core pillar of the design of our event system. Another one is social pressure. There's no point in putting a complex live ops system into a single player game. It will help, our personal tournaments help, but really the value is in providing a story and a set of objectives that alliances can work on together and create their own form of drama and politics around. So social pressure is really important. We wanted to start with 3 different event types. Only 2 of them actually worked. So I don't think you need many different formats, but you need more than one. But you don't need to throw the kitchen sink at having a whole lot of formats, because you can get a lot of variation through small changes. And there needs to be competition. In order for the social pressure to work, there needs to be something that the alliance is fighting for. So when we started, the toolbox was pretty simple. We abstracted a lot of our content so that we could stream it in on demand from Amazon. We built a content management system. So this takes a mind shift in the thinking of the developers to make sure that as many aspects of the game as possible are abstracted from the client and put into a content managed system. So, for example, the stats are an easy one, but also elements of the gameplay that you can put out into a system that can be controlled separately without the need for developers. Scheduling is very important. Live authoring was also important. You do need to be able to come in on a Monday, see something that's happened on the weekend, and react and put out an offer or put out a communication or change the game in response to it. But more important was the ability to schedule events weeks in advance and not be scrambling day to day to keep the program running. And the formats that we started with was the Alliance Totalizer that I showed earlier, Personal Tournament that I showed earlier, and also War Rush. I mean, Samurai Siege, the core of the game was this Alliance War feature that no one else had, and so we felt the need to really extend that. In the end, the War Rush events, this is where we changed the objectives and the specking of the war feature, was not as powerful as just a standard Alliance Totalizer and Personal Tournament. So this is just some short screen grabs of the workflow of our game master in setting up the event this weekend. The key document, we write a spec. This is a very long one. It's 9 pages. We do it in Google Docs. We share it around with everyone. Most of the time, this is just 1 page because we're taking an existing template and just tweaking it. In this case, this weekend was actually our biggest event ever. So there are a lot of systems at play here. So it's a little bit heavier on the spec than usual. The Game Master then, in Rival Kingdoms, makes a local version of the event in Unity. So they have Unity installed on their computer, and they can configure all the parameters of the event. This looks scary. It takes about 2 weeks for a reasonably technical person to master. So it's not something you can just pick up and run with, but nor does it need a CS degree to manage. It just needs a lot of domain knowledge of the game. In Samurai Siege, that system's much more basic. So they'll take a Google Doc, a series of Google Docs, import that into the CMS. In this case, this is an aspect of the event in Rival Kingdoms that he's just importing into his environment right there. So in this way, they can configure the event, see how it feels, make any changes. They then commit the code. We make the game masters use the same workflows as developers, even though they're not really connected. So they're committing these configs in Git. They are running their own Kanban board, but this is more to make sure everyone's talking the same language rather than strictly necessary. If you have multiple people working on the same config, it helps for sure. A lot of the work actually happens in the CMS layer. You see here, he's committed the event, and he's now associating the relevant graphics, localization strings, and also setting up the time-limited bundles and offers. Most of the events we configure are just done in this tool. So they're not using local Unity instances or anything like that, because usually what they're doing is just taking a template, one of the 50 or so events I've done over the last year, tweaking it, putting a new theme on it, changing some of the parameters. But in this case, it's a more complicated event. And then what they do is they push that to the test environment, and then they can run it either on device or on their Unity instance. So looks pretty scary for a super non-technical person, but trust me, it only takes a couple of weeks to get up to speed on this. And that whole process for a major event, so the biggest event we've run in RK, that took about 2 hours. For a small event, it's more like 30 minutes. So the majority of the time isn't spent in the nuts and bolts of setting up the event. It's spent in thinking about what we should do, analyzing how it worked, and obviously in the art production. So over time, obviously our toolbox got more complicated. We have about 5 or 6 different event types. Again, the personal totalizer and the alliance totalizer are the most common ones. We have a few different competition vectors, putting rewards on leaderboards, having leagues, having beat the boss type tournaments where George Xiao plays the game, live streams it on Twitch, and people have to beat him, that kind of thing. The leaderboard rewards being the most effective. We have a lot more content than what we started with. So we've got permanent vanity items that we gave away. So the example from those items that go on the canvas, we still do that. They're just in a very controlled, measured way. A lot of temporary items, a lot of different consumables, and the monetization vectors have changed a little bit over the years. So when we started, what we would do is just give different objectives so people engage with the core loop. The core loop monetizes people who want to play for a long period of time. They train their troops, they skip the troop training, or in the case of Rival Kingdoms, they run out of energy, they buy more energy. And so we monetize the events by putting up bundles to make it cheaper to buy your energy. You can buy 99 battle stones and buy them in bulk. The most effective monetization we've found is selling what I call event accelerants. So this is like the lucky egg on Pokemon Go. You buy something that allows you to then compete in the event but get more value for it. So a classic example would be we're running a nature event in Rival Kingdoms. You get acorns whenever you battle. If you buy this particular bundle, then a particular nature ancient will give you twice as many acorns per battle. So we try and direct the gameplay towards using heroes that maybe are less popular or that we know fit with the story. People pay, they invest, and then they commit to the event more. Our best performing event in Samurai Siege is called Legends of War. It's an alliance totalizer. We give away rewards on the leaderboard, but we give away permanent vanity rewards. So we were never really able to wean ourselves off the crack of the permanent statues that we started giving away at the start. What we do now is we give away fewer of them, and we put them behind this event that we run every 3 or 4 months. And we sell a lot of bundles alongside that, which people buy to then get better value out of their battles. So this is an example of how it appears in game. You see a contest that appears on the right, rewards that you get based on your leaderboard position. The most popular event, so one people always talk about, is our Grand Ram Slam event. This is one that didn't make much money, but people still talk about it 2 years after we started running them. So it's a personal event. We vary up the gameplay, so we change the way this RAM operates, and we give away a temporary functional item, and players love it. The one that made the most money, Rival Kingdoms. This is our Malice event. It was an alliance totalizer again, rewards on the leaderboard, but the difference here was we gave away a permanent functional reward. So the only way to get this Malice dragon, at least the top level of this dragon, was to place in the top 50 alliance during this event. So very powerful drive. We sold event accelerants, so people would pay, and if you wanted to compete, you really needed to buy these bundles so that you got the maximum reward per battle, because it was a very competitive event. You can't do this every week. This was the most powerful content troop in the game at the time. And what we found is the more of these events you do, the more problems you create for yourself. There's only so many most powerful ancients ever that you can run events for. You burn people out, but it is part of the mix. But you do see a lot more cannibalization and a lot more burnout. It's harder to produce this content routinely. Contrast with Transformers Earth Wars. As I said, it's primarily a gacha monetization model. So you see there, I sunk some crystals into my space bridge, beaming down a new robot. This is Grimlock. This is a very big deal. Getting a 3-star Grimlock takes me right back to my childhood. And it is also a very powerful troop. If you get him again, he's converted into resource that's still useful. So the events in Transformers are more about giving away this currency that you can take into the gacha system rather than giving away specific robots. We will very rarely give away a 4-star Grimlock as a reward like we did with the Malice event I talked about with Rival Kingdoms. We will do it occasionally, but very, very sparingly. For the most part, we're giving away currency that goes into the gacha loop. So yeah, Transformers is all about collecting these heroes, and so this live event system works really well because the whole point of the game is to collect all the bots. We also merchandise these things, so we can sell specific crystals in the shop which have a higher drop rate. And what we found is that whereas with Samurai Siege and Rival Kingdoms, we're primarily monetizing the engagement with the event. In Transformers, the events drive engagement, and the monetization is sort of correlated with the event, as opposed to a core part of spending money to compete in the event. So I'm just going to skip through some of these things. This summarizes. So start small, aim for maximum flexibility. Every genre is different. Players love new content, and players especially love permanent functional content. So you're going to get a leaderboard, but you can only do that so often. Little story about how one of our events is Samurai Siege. This is our first event. It's called Save the Season. It was an alliance totalizer. So whenever you did a battle, you got a present, and we gave away some premium currency once you got a certain number of presents. And the top prize was this permanent dragon statue, as I said. This was the format. And so pretty typical, similar to the Malice event I described earlier. And we're very happy with it. It took our daily revenue from $50,000 a day. For a weekend, it was $120,000. So that's great. But then when we did the final analysis of it, turns out it took us 4 or 5 times longer to make the content than it took for players to consume it. And so that was a bit of a problem. And so this leads me to the treadmill issue. As good as your tools are, you need to be able to use them in a way that's sustainable. And the solution we found was from that popular RAM event, as I said. So this was a very simple fix. The RAM is a wall-busting unit in part of the regular gameplay. And what we did is we just made it explode. And this was a very simple change. It was done in a necessity because we left it at the last minute to program the event, and players loved it. And so from that point on, every troop we added to the game was what we call a Frankenstein troop. So lots of many dimensions hidden behind a content management system. So the easiest ones give the ability to change the health, speed, training time, AI. You could make the resource gathering unit chase defenses for a weekend, that kind of thing. More complicated variations is we gave the ability to swap different abilities into the troop, explode on death, change the regular arrows to firing arrows, that kind of thing. Also change the context of the troop, put them on a defensive structure, and also change what they look like. So we have shader tools, so we can change the color of the troop, change VFX. So every troop that goes in now into any of our games has dozens, if not hundreds, of different vectors that can be changed in content, which allows us to keep it fresh. Another example, so I'm just skipping through now because I'm running out of time. The Prismatic Mage Saga. This was when it all really came together for us about a year ago, or maybe, no, about 18 months ago. The Essence Master on the left is a high-end troop. He's got this chain lightning ability, which is pretty weak in isolation, but if you use it on the right base, it can really cut deep into the defenses. We recolored him on the right, called him the Prismatic Mage, just changed the yellow tints to red tints, gave him the Dragon's Fireball, and all of a sudden it's a very desirable troop. We then made a level 2, and the characteristic of the level 2 is when he died, he let off an earthquake spell that blew up the walls. And the max level was just this ridiculous ability here that freezes half the base and brings a rain of fire down on him when he dies. So very highly desirable, all done just in spreadsheet changes, basically. We then spread this out over a 4-week period. So in week 1, we said, look, this Prismatic Mage is coming. He's cool. Here's some gameplay videos. You can't get him yet, but we made a prize in that event. The top prize was a tome, which was basically a token. And you need that token at the end of the event to get the Prismatic Mage. In week 2, we gave away a second token. This is a token to be able to upgrade him. We also introduced some other content, which is time limited. In this case, is the Jade Dragon. That's just taking our Essence Dragon, who's blue, retinting him green, making him more powerful. And on week 3, we had the big event, and we put the token to get that highest level Prismatic Mage on the leaderboard, only gave it to the top 50 alliances. And so the cycle of those alliances who wanted to compete in it was, I said, look, guys, go for the first 2 events, prepare, get all these temporary boosts and items and use them in the third one. The more organized alliances treated those as training grounds and said, okay, we're going to go for this highest level Prismatic Mage. If you want to be on the team, show that you're worth it by competing in the first 2 events. And so it created a lot of pressure, and it was very successful. And on the 4th week, we just had an engagement event, not designed to make money, but gave people the ability to use all the toys they got. Those little dots there represent the intensity of the event. So this is a system that we have. So a 4-finger event on week 3 is one that people are going to chase for. A 1-finger one is a low intensity one. And what we see is those intensity levels roughly correlate to revenue. We'll have a big spike. That's our 4-finger event. We'll follow it up with an easy one. And we get people into this routine. And that works really well, and it transfers well to the other games. So this is the event that started last week in Rival Kingdoms, following a very similar structure. All those guys on the left are just recolors of existing ancients in the game, but they have this new element, which is a recolor of an existing element. And at the end of the 5 weeks, they all combine to get this really high level and desirable troop. So, summary. Manage your content treadmill by finding the right cadence. In our case, it's this 1, 3, 2, 4 intensity that works pretty well. Make sure every troop, every piece of content that goes in the game have many different vectors that are content managed, and try to spread that content over a series of weeks to allow you to bank up many events with a small amount of work. We've never got better than 1-to-4 ratio, but I guess the final point, don't be afraid to reuse a lot of your existing things. Like for a long time in Samurai Siege, we thought that to keep things fresh, we had to do major changes. It turns out people get just as excited about their RAMs exploding than they do about the massive Christmas feature that we did. So that's it, really. I'm just going to skip through these because I've already covered. So events can make a lot of money. Beware of cannibalization, content bloat, and messing up your economy. Hire T-shaped people. Start with a small toolbox, streaming content management, and scheduling being the most important things. And find the right cadence so that you have a sustainable treadmill to use those tools. So that's it. Are we out of time for questions? Or?
Questions.
Hello. Great talk. Really enjoyed it and very useful. What I wanted to ask was about the live ops teams. You mentioned a lot about just reusing a lot of the content that you have, but do those live op teams are they T-shaped enough that they actually produce the shaders, the meshes, or the sprites themselves, or do the builds, or is that outsourced to another part of the studio?
So we have a series of it's different for different stages of maturity for the different games. But in Samurai Siege, we have a lot of the shader tech built into Unity in a way that non-technical people can do it. So they can turn our blue Essence Dragon into a green Jade Dragon. They can swap out they can use a VFX that we've made for an exploding building and put that on the ninja when they throw a ninja star. So they can do a lot of stuff, but for the actual art production, if it's not reusing an asset that's in the game, then we have a shared art team that sort of gets contracted in periodically to produce content. So what they generally do is they'll get people seconded on for a week or two. They'll try and make the next 3 months worth of content, put it in a library. It's not, you can't always predict it, so we always need to bring people on and off for small tweaks, but for the most part we try and concentrate it in batches, and then the live ops team just doles that content out.
Great. Thank you.
Hello. My question is, what are your promotion channels and community channels? And I saw you have one team member take care of the community. Is it enough when you do the intensive promotions or events?
So certainly not for a launch. For steady state, what we do is we have one embedded person on each team, but then we also have a shared CS and community team of about 4 or 5 people, and then they manage an army of people on zero-hour contracts that are outsourced. For the most part, for Siege, they're pretty self-contained. It just takes one person to do it all, but yeah, for a big feature launch, certainly for a game launch, obviously we'd augment them. So we have again, like art, we have a shared pool. Those people are generally on just the game that's launching next or the game that's just launched, but they might be able to provide some support if there's need for a crunch. But for the most part, I think Samurai Siege is self-sufficient. Rival Kingdoms has a VIP person and a community person and an embedded CS lead. So it's a little bit bigger. It's maybe 12 people, to give you an idea.
Have you ever, sorry, just one question. Have you ever got, how to say, a project or cooperation with Google or Apple to do the campaign, to promote your...
So both platforms seem to be doing more featuring of live events. So we have had some events featured, and I've seen other developers get their events featured as well. So I think one of the challenges is this sort of Thursday to Thursday weekly cycle. It's really geared towards feature releases. You're seeing more and more off-cycle featurings now. So yeah, so both platforms are showing signs that they'll curate content more around live events. But I still think majority of featuring on both platforms is feature updates and launches, but for sure that's changing. Cool, is that it?
I think if you want to invite people to ask your offers at the talk, you can do that now.
Okay.
But I think for the official questions, we're done.
Okay, cool. So we're at time. I'll be hanging around for a little while, packing up. So happy to answer questions. Also, my details are up here. Email or WeChat me if you want to follow up. Happy to talk more about this.